The evening that shattered my world was one of those perfect autumn nights. The air was crisp, and the fading sunlight cast a warm glow across our living room. But little did I know that the idyllic setting was merely a facade for the storm that was about to hit. I had been married to Mark for 5 years, and in those years, we had built a life together that I thought was unbreakable. We had faced our fair share of challenges, but I believed that our love could weather any storm. However, as the days passed, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. Mark had been acting differently for weeks. He would arrive home late from work, his eyes distant, and his phone constantly buzzing with messages that he was reluctant to share with me. At first, I dismissed it as work-related stress. But as time went on, the pit in my stomach grew deeper, and my intuition told me that there was more to it. One particular evening, as I sat alone in our dimly lit bedroom, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. Mark had left his phone unattended on the nightstand, and curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up, expecting to find nothing more than innocent messages from friends or coworkers. But what I discovered instead were messages and pictures that sent shockwaves through my entire being. There, on Mark's phone, was undeniable evidence of his infidelity. My hands trembled as I scrolled through messages filled with affectionate words and intimate photos exchanged between him and a coworker named Sarah. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I felt a knot in my chest tighten. The man I had loved and trusted had been cheating on me for months. I was devastated, betrayed, and utterly broken. It was a moment that would change the course of my life forever. The weight of the truth I'd uncovered in Chapter 1 was suffocating, and I knew I couldn't carry it alone. With trembling hands, I confronted Mark about the damning evidence I'd found on his phone. The tension in our home was palpable as I entered our bedroom, my heart pounding like a drum. Mark was sitting on the edge of our bed, his head hanging low as if he already knew what was coming. He didn't look up when I walked in, but the silence was thick with anticipation. I stood before him, my voice quivering as I demanded an explanation. "Mark," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "what is all this? Who is Sarah?" He didn't try to deny it. With a heavy sigh, he finally looked up, his eyes filled with guilt and shame. Mark admitted to his affair with Sarah, his words a painful admission of his betrayal. The room felt smaller as he confessed to the months of deceit, the lies and the stolen moments with another one. He apologized repeatedly, his voice breaking with every word, but it was too late. The trust that had once bound us together had been shattered beyond repair. I felt a mixture of anger, heartbreak, and confusion coursing through me. How could he have done this to us, to me? We had shared dreams, built a life together, and now it all seemed to crumble in front of my eyes. I demanded answers, the questions pouring out of me like a torrent. Why had he done it? Did he ever truly love me? Was our entire relationship a lie? Mark's explanations were filled with remorse, but they offered no solace. He admitted that he had lost sight of what truly mattered, that he had been selfish and weak. He couldn't provide the answers I so desperately sought because he didn't have them himself. As we both sat there, tears streaming down our faces, I realized that our marriage had come to a devastating crossroads. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. I knew with a heavy heart that I had to make a painful decision, a decision that would lead to the end of our once perfect marriage. In the aftermath of Mark's confession about his affair, our home became a battleground of emotions. The once cozy spaces that had been filled with love and laughter were now tainted by betrayal and heartache. It was a difficult and tumultuous time as we both grappled with the reality of our shattered marriage. The days that followed the confrontation were a blur of sleepless nights, tearful arguments, and moments of painful silence. I couldn't bear to look at Mark, the man I had once believed to be my soulmate, without feeling a deep sense of betrayal and hurt. Despite the emotional turmoil, one thing became clear to me. I couldn't continue living in this marriage. Trust, once broken, is a fragile thing, and I knew that it could never be fully restored. The thought of staying with Mark and trying to salvage our relationship felt like an impossible task. The pain was too deep and the wounds were too fresh. With a heavy heart and a mind filled with uncertainty, I made the gut-wrenching decision to file for divorce. It was a choice that came with its own set of challenges and fears. I had to face the reality of dismantling the life we had built together, dividing our assets, and navigating the legal complexities of ending a marriage. As I began the process of separating from Mark, I leaned on my closest friends and family for support. They became my pillars of strength during those dark days, offering a shoulder to cry on and words of encouragement when I needed them most. It was during this time that my mother-in-law, Linda, entered the picture. She had always been a presence in our lives, but our relationship had been relatively distant. Linda, however, saw the situation through a different lens. Linda, my mother-in-law, entered the picture as I began the painful process of ending my marriage to Mark. She had offered to let me stay with her temporarily while I sorted out the details of the divorce. At the time, I saw her offer as a lifeline, a place of refuge amidst the storm that had become my life. Little did I know the true nature of Linda's intentions. As I moved into her home, I expected some support, a sense of empathy from my husband's mother during this tumultuous time. After all, we had shared holidays, family gatherings, and countless conversations over the years. However, I quickly realized that Linda's true feelings were far from what I had imagined. From the moment I stepped through the door, I was met with an icy reception. Linda's demeanor towards me was cold, distant, and unwelcoming. It was as if I had become the embodiment of all her grievances and disappointments. I had hoped for some understanding and compassion, but instead, Linda chose to blame me for the collapse of her son's marriage. She refused to acknowledge Mark's role in the affair or the pain he had caused me. Instead, she accused me of being the root cause of his infidelity, as if my actions had somehow forced him into the arms of another woman. Every day felt like walking on eggshells in Linda's house. She made her disapproval clear through passive-aggressive comments, disapproving glances, and the constant reminder that I was an unwanted presence in her home. She questioned my every move, criticized my choices, and nitpicked at the smallest details. Linda's hostility extended beyond mere words. She often made it clear that she wanted me out of her house as soon as possible. She had no sympathy for the emotional turmoil I was going through, and her lack of support only intensified my feelings of isolation and despair. As the days turned into weeks, Linda's behavior became increasingly unbearable. I felt like an intruder in her home, unwelcome and unappreciated. The refuge I had sought had become a hostile environment, and I longed for a way out. Little did I know that Linda's actions were about to escalate to a shocking level in the days to come. Living with Linda became increasingly unbearable as her hostility and resentment grew. Each day felt like a test of my endurance as I navigated her constant criticism and passive-aggressive behavior. The tension in the house was palpable, and I couldn't help but feel like a prisoner in my own life. One evening, as I was trying to keep to myself in the small room Linda had begrudgingly allowed me to occupy, she burst through the door, her face contorted with anger. I could see in her eyes that she had reached a breaking point, and she wasn't willing to tolerate my presence any longer. "Get out of my house!" Linda shouted, her voice trembling with rage. "I've had enough of you and your drama. You're not welcome here!" My heart sank as I realized that Linda was giving me an ultimatum. It was clear that she wanted me gone, and she wasn't going to wait any longer for me to find a new place to stay. She threatened to call the police if I didn't comply with her demand to leave immediately. Feeling cornered and desperate, I had to make a difficult choice. I knew I couldn't stay in this hostile environment, but I also didn't have a clear plan for where to go next. Linda's actions had left me emotionally drained and vulnerable, and I needed to find a safe haven to regroup. With a heavy heart, I agreed to leave her house, but I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't let Linda's actions define my future. I needed to find the strength to stand on my own and rebuild my life, free from the toxicity that had consumed me. As I began to pack my belongings, I couldn't help but wonder how I had gone from being a member of the family to an unwelcome outsider in such a short span of time. The pain of betrayal and the torment of Linda's hostility had taken a toll on me, but I knew that I had to persevere and find a way to move forward. Little did I know that Linda's decision to involve the police would lead to an unexpected turn of events that would change the course of our lives forever. The morning following Linda's ultimatum was one filled with a sense of urgency and anxiety. I had packed what little I had and was preparing to leave her house, the place I had hoped would provide solace during the turmoil of my divorce. But Linda had made it abundantly clear that she no longer wanted me there, and I couldn't stay where I wasn't welcome. As I gathered my belongings, a sense of dread settled over me. I had never been in this situation before, and the uncertainty of where to go next weighed heavily on my mind. However, I had no other immediate options. My friends and family were miles away, and I couldn't bear the thought of burdening them with my troubles. I was determined to face the world on my own terms, even if it meant venturing into the unknown. With a heavy heart and a backpack filled with essentials, I made my way to the front door. But just as I was about to step outside, my heart nearly stopped. I heard the distant wailing of sirens growing louder, and then the unmistakable sound of a police car pulling up in front of Linda's house. Panic coursed through my veins as I realized that Linda had actually called the police on me. The situation had escalated far beyond anything I had anticipated. I felt my palms start to sweat as fear gripped me. What would happen next? Why had Linda taken such extreme measures? 2 uniformed police officers emerged from the patrol car, and my anxiety intensified. They walked up the path to Linda's front door, their expressions serious and determined. The world seemed to slow down as they knocked on the door, and I couldn't help but feel like a criminal in my own life. Linda opened the door with a smug look on her face, as if she had finally achieved her goal of ridding her house of me. She explained to the officers that I was trespassing and refusing to leave her property, all while shooting me a triumphant glance. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched the officers listen to Linda's version of events. I knew that I needed to speak up and tell them the truth, but fear held me back. What if they didn't believe me? What if they thought I was the one causing trouble? As the officers turned their attention towards me, their eyes filled with suspicion, I knew that I had to find my voice and defend myself. I took a deep breath and braced myself for what I was about to say. As the police officers turned their attention towards me, their expressions serious and their eyes filled with suspicion, I knew that I had to find my voice and tell them the truth. The stakes were high, and I couldn't let Linda's false accusations define my fate. With a racing heart and trembling hands, I stepped forward, determined to make the officers understand the reality of the situation. I knew that I had to speak with clarity and conviction to counter Linda's false claims. "I'm not trespassing," I began, my voice quivering but resolute. "I've been staying here temporarily at Linda's invitation while I go through a difficult divorce. I have no intention of causing any trouble or staying where I'm not wanted." I could feel the weight of the moment, the outcome hanging in the balance. The officers exchanged a glance, clearly uncertain about how to proceed. Linda, on the other hand, stood beside me, her face a mask of feigned innocence. I continued, my words flowing with an urgency born of desperation. "What Linda hasn't told you is that I'm here because of her insistence. She offered me a place to stay when my life fell apart, but it's become clear that she wants me out of her house as quickly as possible." The officers seemed to be listening intently, and I knew I had their attention. I spoke about the emotional abuse I had endured, the constant hostility, and the toxic environment that Linda had created. I explained how her ultimatum had forced me to leave willingly but under duress. Tears welled up in my eyes as I spoke about the pain of my divorce and the isolation I'd felt in Linda's home. I didn't hold back, pouring out the truth and the raw emotions that had been building within me. The officers, sensing the sincerity in my words, began to shift their stance. They asked Linda to step aside and spoke to her privately. I couldn't hear their conversation, but Linda's angry gestures and indignant tone were evident. After a few minutes, the officers returned to me. Their expressions changed. They explained that they understood the situation better now and that they wouldn't take any action against me. They warned Linda about making false claims and abusing the emergency services. As I stepped out of the house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. The police intervention had been a turning point, a moment when the truth had prevailed over deceit and manipulation. I had faced a daunting challenge, but I had emerged with my dignity intact. Linda, on the other hand, was left fuming, her plans to rid herself of me thwarted. Little did she know that her actions would have far-reaching consequences and that the seeds of her own downfall had been sown. The police intervention had brought a momentary reprieve from the oppressive atmosphere of Linda's house. As I stepped out into the cool, crisp air, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: grief, gratitude, and a renewed sense of determination. The officers had warned Linda about making false claims and abusing emergency services, which left her seething with anger. It was clear that she had expected her actions to go unchallenged, and the realization that her plans had failed was a bitter pill for her to swallow. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The police intervention had not only exposed Linda's true intentions, but had also given me a glimmer of hope. It was a turning point in my journey, a moment when the truth had prevailed over deceit, and I had been given a second chance to rebuild my life. I reached out to friends and family, explaining what had transpired and expressing my gratitude for their support. Their unwavering love and encouragement provided a much-needed source of strength as I navigated the challenging path ahead. As my divorce proceedings continued, I focused on rebuilding my life. I found a small apartment, started attending support groups for those going through divorce, and sought therapy to heal the emotional wounds left by the betrayal and the toxic environment I had endured. Linda, on the other hand, found herself isolated and facing the consequences of her actions. Her friends and family began to see her true colors as the details of her false accusations and manipulation came to light. Even her own son, Mark, distanced himself from her, appalled by her behavior. Linda's obsession with trying to hurt me had cost her everything: her reputation, her relationships, and her son's trust. She had become the subject of gossip and condemnation within her own social circle. The contrast between our lives couldn't have been more stark. While Linda's actions had led to her isolation and downfall, I had emerged from the chaos stronger and more resilient than ever. The chapter of my life that had started with betrayal and deceit had led me to a place of self-discovery and healing. As the divorce proceedings neared their conclusion, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure and empowerment. The pain of my past had shaped me into a stronger, more resilient person, and I was determined to embrace the future with hope and optimism. In the aftermath of the police intervention, the dynamics in Linda's life began to unravel. Her actions had not only been exposed, but they had also resulted in the loss of trust and respect from those around her. The consequences of her obsession with trying to hurt me were swift and unforgiving. Linda's social circle, once filled with friends who admired her, began to distance themselves from her. The gossip about her false accusations and manipulation spread like wildfire, tarnishing her reputation irreparably. It was as if a spotlight had been shone on her true character, revealing the darkness within. Even Mark, her own son, was deeply disappointed and disillusioned by Linda's actions. He had been aware of her hostility towards me, but the police intervention and the subsequent fallout pushed him further away from her. The bond between a mother and son was strained, and Linda's actions had caused irreparable damage. As I continued with my divorce proceedings, I found strength in the support of my friends and family. They rallied around me, offering their unwavering love and encouragement. I immersed myself in therapy, seeking healing for the emotional wounds inflicted by the betrayal and the toxic environment I'd endured. The contrast between Linda's life and mine was stark. While she faced isolation and condemnation, I emerged from the chaos of my past stronger and more resilient. The ordeal had tested my limits, but it had also revealed my inner strength and resilience. As the divorce proceedings drew to a close, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure and empowerment. The pain of my past had shaped me into a stronger, more self-assured person, and I was determined to embrace the future with hope and optimism. Linda, on the other hand, was left to grapple with the consequences of her actions, a life devoid of the relationships and respect that had once defined her. The pursuit of vengeance had ultimately led to her own downfall, a lesson in the destructive power of obsession and cruelty. In the end, the chapter of my life that began with betrayal and deceit had given way to a new beginning, one filled with resilience, healing, and the promise of a brighter future. The darkness of the past had been replaced by the light of hope, and I was ready to embrace the next chapter of my life with open arms.